For many years, Maurice Brand wielded his badge as if it were a weapon, until one day he apprehended the wrong individual and found himself answerable to someone far more knowledgeable about the law than he was. Maurice had traveled that section of Highway 84 near Valdosta, Georgia over 100 times before, as it was part of his usual route home from community gatherings. That evening he was returning from a veteran outreach event where he had addressed younger veterans about housing assistance, support services, and job opportunities. Feeling at ease, Maurice softly hummed along to a Luther Vandross tune, playing quietly in his car, when suddenly the flashing blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. Without hesitation, Maurice pulled his vehicle over. The patrol car halted behind him, engines still running. Maurice kept both hands firmly on the steering wheel, fully aware of the procedure. In fact, he activated the voice recording application on his phone and positioned it towards the window. He remained calm, did not panic or glance backward. He simply waited. A white officer approached the driver's side window, exuding a kind of arrogance Maurice had witnessed before. Not in combat zones or courtrooms, but right here in small southern town police departments. Those who embraced power without accountability. The officer said with a voice dripping boredom, "Evening. You know why I pulled you over?" Maurice met his gaze with steady composure and responded, "No, sir, I do not." The officer replied, "Your tail lights are out." Maurice did not turn to verify. "I had my car serviced last week. They checked the lights," he said confidently. The officer scoffed shortly. "License and registration," he demanded. Maurice handed them over carefully, mindful not to act too quickly. The officer identified himself as B. Kent and stared at the ID before glancing toward the back seat. "What is in the bag?" he asked. "My laptop and notes from a seminar I presented today. I am an attorney," Maurice Brand replied. The word attorney hit Kent like a small brick. He hesitated just a fraction too long. "Oh yes," he said. "Step out of the vehicle for me." Maurice did not move. "Am I being detained?" "You are now for a tail light," Kent responded, lowering his hand to his belt. "Sir, please step out of the car now." Maurice slowly opened the door and stepped out, keeping his phone recording at his side. The audio continued without interruption. No sudden actions or raised voice came from Maurice. He was not there to argue, yet he was unwilling to give in. Kent ordered him to place his hands on the hood and then frisked him roughly. Maurice did not resist. Instead, he calmly asked, "Am I under arrest, and what is the charge?" Kent said nothing, instead walking around the car while shining his flashlight on the taillights. Almost irritated, he circled back. "The lights appear fine, but you did not comply quickly enough. I am citing you for obstruction." Maurice blinked in surprise at the word obstruction. "You failed to follow a lawful order," Kent explained. Maurice stared him directly in the eyes and said, "You mean the order to get out of the car without any valid reason?" Kent did not appreciate this and curled his lips slightly, leaning closer. "If you have a problem, you can take it up with the court." "I plan to," Maurice said. Kent handed him the citation, tore off the top copy, and walked away as if the issue was resolved. Still, Maurice remained standing there for a moment longer. Calming his breathing, he glanced down at the paper in his grasp, and then toward the officers who were retreating. "Officer Kent," he called out clearly so it could be heard, "I look forward to seeing you in court." Kent turned halfway around, appearing surprised, but he did not respond. He got back into his vehicle and drove away. Maurice Brand remained standing by the roadside, his heart rate elevated yet steady. He was not angry. He was prepared. Opening the trunk, he inspected the taillight. It was still working, glowing a steady red. He snapped a photo with his phone, which included a timestamp, then slid back into the driver's seat. The Luther Vandross song had finished playing. He restarted it and smoothly drove off. However, Kent had no idea of whom he was actually dealing with. Maurice Brand did not own a television, claiming it distracted him. What he did have was a whiteboard, 3 legal pads, a worn-out laptop, and a memory that was incredibly sharp. Each morning before the sun rose, he would sip his black coffee while sitting by the window that looked out onto Patterson Street and begin working. The citation officer Kent had issued was barely 2 paragraphs long, filled with vague terms such as failure to comply, verbal resistance, and potential safety risk. It was not the kind of charge that attracted public attention, but was just ambiguous enough to hold up in court, especially in a town where most judges trusted a badge without further scrutiny. Maurice Brand was not going to allow them that convenience. He started with the fundamentals. Georgia Code, Section 16, 2, 10, 24, obstruction of law enforcement officers. He committed every detail to memory, including exceptions and annotations, then cross-checked everything. Maurice Brand noticed a clear pattern in Kent's prior citations for obstruction. Almost all involved black drivers. Most defendants never contested the charges. Those who did had their cases quietly dismissed without further inquiry. Maurice meticulously tracked down each individual, reaching out by phone or visiting in person. Occasionally, he would simply leave a message saying, "I am reviewing a previous citation and would like to hear your perspective." Some people chose not to respond. Others avoided reopening painful memories, but a few agreed to talk. A retired church deacon named Wallace Hightower shared how he was stopped near a Kroger store for fitting a vague description. That happened 6 years earlier, and Wallace still kept the ticket inside his Bible. He said it served as a reminder that not much had changed despite people's claims. Another woman, Tanisha Drury, told Maurice how Kent had followed her home one evening, alleging her license plate appeared expired from a distance. Kent then accused her of erratic driving after she became nervous and asked too many questions. Maurice took detailed notes, recorded their accounts, and thanked them without promising any specific outcome. Only fairness. Returning to his office, he began assembling a timeline of all the stops and citations, including dates, names, and exact wording from the charges. He spread the printed pages across the wall, using paper clips, string, and tape. To an outside observer, it might have seemed like a simple arrangement. To him, it formed a map illustrating a deeply flawed system. Meanwhile, the date for his court hearing drew closer. He submitted a request to represent himself without any private lawyer or public defender. The judge agreed instantly, without any objection. During quiet moments, Maurice rehearsed his opening statements aloud. Moving around his modest living room, he practiced his cross-examinations, focusing not only on the words, but also on the tone, body language, and eye contact. His aim was not to shame Kent, but to reveal the truth clearly and unmistakably, even to those unwilling to acknowledge it. He also prepared questions for the prosecution. Was there body camera footage? There was none. Were there witnesses to the stop? Had Kent been the subject of previous complaints? That part would come later. Maurice even conducted a trial run with a friend from Decatur over a video call, where the friend played Kent's role. "You sound like someone who's done this 100 times, the friend remarked. Maurice responded, "I have lived it longer than I have practiced it." By the Thursday prior to the hearing, Maurice had organized his files by color and stacked them neatly. One folder contained printed copies of all relevant traffic laws. Another included statements from former victims. A third held full transcripts of court rulings about authority abuse. Taped inside the cover of his last folder was a photograph of his Army unit from 2008, taken a week after they had lost someone in an ambush. He kept it there as a reminder. That day had transformed him and taught him what control meant and how quickly it could vanish when one stops paying attention. This courtroom was not a battlefield, yet it carried equally high stakes. Many people did not believe change was achievable. In places like Valdosta, too many had grown accustomed to accepting injustice as if it were as natural as breathing. However, Maurice Brand understood that systems only maintain power when no one challenged them. He was no longer filled with anger. Instead, he was prepared. Hearing began to spread that something novel was on its way. Bradley Kent had spent more than 10 years with the Valdosta Police Department. He was not the kind to break down doors or pursue criminals through dark alleys. His focus was mostly on traffic during day shifts, handling routine patrols and small tasks. Over time, however, people especially in the black community started to notice a clear pattern. He carried himself in a specific manner, often smirking more than smoking, and gave orders as if they were commands. He enjoyed having control, and if anyone dared to question him, he would write them up, search their vehicle, or impose a minor charge simply to assert dominance. Conversations about him took place in barbershops, at fish fries, and in church parking lots, but rarely on official records. In small towns like Valdosta, resisting authority could lead to harassment, delays in obtaining business licenses, or extra patrol cars cruising past your home late at night. Most preferred to avoid trouble by staying silent, paying fines, and moving forward. One story had remained with Maurice for years, a memory that never felt right. A young man named Dion Patrick, who was only 19 at the time, had been stopped while riding his bicycle. Returning home after his shift at the Waffle House, Dion had no light on his bicycle. and Officer Kent wrote him a citation. Kent claimed Dion's behavior was suspicious and searched his backpack. Inside, Dion only had a bag filled with leftover waffles, no weapons or drugs, yet Kent labeled his response uncooperative and arrested him. The charges were dropped 2 weeks later, but by that time Dion's employer had already replaced him because of too many missed shifts. The following year, Dion left Valdosta behind. Maurice Brand recalled jotting the entire incident down in his notebook, feeling both frustrated and powerless since no one had recorded the event and there were no witnesses. It was simply Dion's word against the badge. Now Maurice had his own detailed account. But this was more than just a story. The community did not exactly come together immediately. When Maurice filed the complaint, curiosity arose, people whispered, and a few friends inquired about what had happened. Maurice did not share the full details yet, but gradually the atmosphere changed. Others began recalling their own minor encounters with Officer Kent, incidents often dismissed for years, but many accumulated. Maurice committed himself to investigating further. He filed requests for public records and examined citations issued by Kent over the past 5 years. He noticed a disturbing pattern. A disproportionate number of stops targeted black drivers, frequently citing vague reasons such as failure to signal, obstructed view, or driving under suspicion. Nearly half of these citations never made it to court, with drivers simply paying fines and moving on. However, the names and repeated pattern began to paint a clearer picture. Kent was not only rude and harsh, he was also purposeful and selective. Now, because of Maurice Brand, his tactics were finally going to be examined within the department. Kent did not appear concerned. If anything, he seemed annoyed that someone had dared to challenge him. He told a colleague in the locker room, "The guy's just seeking attention. You see how calm he is? That's fake. He's trying to build a case." The other officer remained silent. Kent sneered. "It doesn't matter, I have my report and he just has his words. The judge will glance once and dismiss it." However, what Kent had not anticipated was precisely what made Maurice Brand stand out. He did not act impulsively. He acted strategically. A quiet defendant can be overlooked, but a quiet lawyer armed with facts, questions, and an unshakable calm that pierces through arrogance is far more difficult to ignore. Beneath that composed surface, Maurice had begun gathering evidence far more threatening than anger. He collected receipts, witnesses' past encounters, a trail of documents revealing a man who had gone unchecked for far too long. Over the years, Kent never gave it much thought, just another stop, another ticket, another face forgotten by evening. But now those faces were all recalling him at once. That subtle fear was about to confront quiet determination. On the morning of the hearing, the Valdosta Municipal Courthouse appeared the same as ever. Plain brick walls, weathered steps, a flag barely fluttering in the humid Georgia air. Beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered as everyone noticed the extra pairs of eyes. A young local journalist from the South Georgia Ledger stood outside clutching a notepad. 2 retired veterans from Maurice Brand's outreach team occupied seats in the courtroom's back row. In the hallway, a hushed exchange took place between 2 individuals. "That is the officer, isn't it?" Officer Bradley Kent entered wearing a crisp navy blue uniform. His gold badge gleamed like a mirror, and his posture was rigid with his chin slightly raised. He took a seat near the front beside the town prosecutor, a man named Dorian Winslow, who had handled countless petty cases over the years, but retained only faint memories of most. Maurice stepped into the courtroom alone, carrying a battered black briefcase and a modest pile of folders. There was no entourage, no fanfare, just serene assurance. The room did not fall silent. Instead, it shifted. People observed the way he moved, how he addressed the bailiff by name, and how he positioned himself calmly behind the defendant's table, arranging his documents with deliberate care. Judge Bernard Tilson, a man better known for his strict punctuality than his patience, entered precisely at 9 in the morning. State of Georgia versus Maurice Brand, citation number 21504, the clerk announced. "Present," Morris affirmed while standing tall. Dorian Winslow stood as well, declaring, "Prosecution is ready, Your Honor." Judge Tilson glanced at both men and then focused back on the paperwork. "Mr. Brand, I see you have chosen to act as your own counsel." "That is correct, Your Honor." "You comprehend your rights?" "Absolutely. Let us continue." Winslow began with a straightforward summary of the incident. A traffic stop with non-compliance, a citation issued. He did not add any flourish or exaggeration since this was meant to be straightforward. Then it was Maurice Brand's turn. "Your Honor," he started, his voice steady yet resolute. "I would like to introduce Exhibit A into evidence, a complete video recording of the traffic stop in question. Captured on my own device, it remains unedited, time-stamped, and includes clear audio." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Objection?" he asked, glancing at Winslow. The prosecutor hesitated before replying, "No objection, Your Honor." Maurice then approached the court's audiovisual station and inserted a flash drive. The screen lit up, and the room grew silent. The video began playing, and everyone in the courtroom could hear clearly Kent's voice issuing the demand to exit the vehicle. The footage demonstrated that the taillight was functioning properly, while Maurice's calm, repeated questioning was evident. There was no aggression, no shouting, no bursts of anger or violence. It was precisely this quiet presentation that made the evidence hit with more force. By the end, the only sound was a cough somewhere in the back, and nothing else. Maurice turned back to the judge and said, "That is the full footage, Your Honor. No other events took place beyond what you have just witnessed." Judge Tilson reclined slightly, pressing his lips together, remaining silent for a considerable time. Winslow adjusted his tie and started to speak. "Your Honor, although the video has been noted, the charge in question does relate to the incident itself." The judge interrupted curtly, "Let us not pretend otherwise." Meanwhile, Kent sat completely still, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. His jaw tightened, revealing the strain in his muscles. Maurice Brand returned to his seat and opened a new file. "Additionally, Your Honor," he stated, "I have gathered a record of previous traffic violations issued by Officer Kent over the past 4 years, obtained through public records requests. I will submit these along with statements from several individuals who faced similar stops with nearly the same wording in their citations." Now the audience began paying close attention. The judge raised his hand and said, "Let us address one matter at a time. Mr. Brand, you are contesting the obstruction charge based on this footage." "Yes, sir," Maurice replied. The judge nodded slowly. "We will recess for 20 minutes. I want to review the ticket, the video, and the officer's written report before moving forward." Maurice sat down calmly, folding his hands. Kent rose too abruptly and exited the courtroom. In the hallway outside, a man shook Maurice's hand. "I did not realize you were so thorough, Brand. My brother served alongside you and said you were quiet but never overlooked anything." Maurice offered a faint smile, still composed. Back inside the courtroom, whispers passed among those present. The judge had now watched the tape, and the prosecution's certainty seemed to waver. Kent, who had entered the room confident in his control of the proceedings, was now witnessing that control slip away beneath his feet. Then, when Maurice pressed play as the session resumed, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The audience was no longer passive. They leaned forward, captivated, eyes locked on the screen, fully engaged with what unfolded. Officer Kent had not returned to his seat. Instead, he remained standing in the corridor with his arms folded. Speaking quietly to someone on the phone, his face appeared pale under the bright fluorescent lights inside the courtroom. Judge Tilson called the room to attention and adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Brand," he said, "your video has brought up several legal concerns, mainly about the validity of the obstruction charge. I would like to hear your direct explanation of the event." Maurice responded, "No theatrics. No exaggerations, just calm and clear, Your Honor." He said, "What you viewed on the recording is the whole episode. No escalation, no defiance. I asked straightforward lawful questions. I complied without hostility. The citation issued to me was not merely unnecessary. It was retaliatory, intended to punish me for exercising my rights." The judge glanced toward the prosecutor. "Mr. Winslow." Winslow cleared his throat. "We recognize the defendant's cooperation, yet the officer asserts that the delay in leaving the vehicle raised a safety issue." Maurice remained unfazed. "Respectfully, Your Honor, remaining calm is not obstruction. Asking questions is not defiance, and concern is not a criminal offense." The judge tapped his pen once, then leaned forward. "Agree with the defendant on that matter." The courtroom stayed silent, but the tension was palpable. Then Maurice opened another folder. "I would like to present additional evidence indicating a series of questionable stops conducted by Officer Kent over the last several years. There are 14 citations, all involving black drivers, issued for unclear violations. Most of these contain very similar wording and ended up either dismissed or resulting in fines. Several individuals provided written statements. He handed the papers to the clerk. Judge Tilson flipped through the initial pages. "How did you get these public records?" he asked. "I filed a request a month ago. I planned this before the hearing," he answered. The judge looked up slowly, examining Maurice Brand for a moment. "Why?" "Because this is not just about me. It concerns what keeps happening when no one speaks up." He did not raise his voice, but his calm tone made the message more powerful. Outside, more people had gathered. A local podcast crew arrived with a microphone and a camera. News spread quickly in small towns like Valdosta, faster than anyone would admit. Maurice Brand became the focus, not because he was loud, but because he refused to let the issue be ignored. Inside the courtroom, Kent finally returned and took the witness stand, looking annoyed, not worried. Maurice moved to the podium. "Officer Kent, you stated in your report that I was verbally resistant. Could you explain what you mean by that?" Kent shifted uncomfortably. "You refused to follow my order to get out of the car immediately." "Did I raise my voice? Did I make any physical threat? Did I ever say I would not exit the vehicle?" Kent hesitated. "You delayed by asking if I'm being detained." Kent glanced toward Winslow, who returned nothing. Maurice moved closer. "Officer Kent, do you honestly think that simply asking a question makes someone guilty of obstruction?" Kent's jaw clenched. "It depends on the circumstances exactly. So in this situation where I remained calm, polite and cooperative, you pressed obstruction charges." After a brief silence, Kent offered no reply. Maurice leaned back, no further inquiries. The judge appeared exhausted. Now weary from the glaring imbalance and the charade, he dismissed Kent from the witness stand and addressed the prosecution. "I am giving you two choices," the judge said with a flattened tone. "You may either move to withdraw the charges, or I can deliver a judgment regardless. We will not proceed as if that video never existed." Winslow, consulted with Kent, seemed ready to argue, but even he understood the tide had turned. "We move to dismiss your honor." Motion approved just like that. Yet Maurice did not sit down. He raised a hand, seeking permission to speak briefly. "Your honor," the judge nodded. "I came prepared to defend myself, not only because I believed I was right, but because I believed in the integrity of this process, that someone could enter this courtroom armed only with a camera, and the truth without being penalized. I ask the court to consider reviewing the officer's previous cases, especially those with similar allegations." The judge did not reply immediately, then said, "We will review your submissions." The courtroom emptied as people rose to leave, when a man near the back quietly said he had just uncovered the whole truth. Yet the story did not end there. Several others recognized the same face before the courthouse doors had even closed behind Maurice Brand. Soon his phone began ringing with calls from unfamiliar local numbers. People reached out to express gratitude and to share their own experiences. Within a single day, the South Georgia Ledger published an article headlined, "Man Represents Himself in Court and Has Obstruction Charge Dropped After Using His Own Video." The article did not mention race or any particular patterns, but the image accompanying it showed Maurice dressed in a gray suit, calmly exiting the courthouse with a file in hand, conveying more than words ever could. That very weekend, a woman named Yolanda Drew unexpectedly arrived at Maurice's office, without arranging a meeting beforehand. Standing at the door clutching a small manila envelope, she said, "You do not know me, but Officer Kent stopped my husband last year and cited him for an aggressive tone." She handed Maurice the envelope, inside of which was a copy of the citation and an audio recording. Maurice listened later that evening. The husband's voice was tired yet courteous, while Kent's tone sounded annoyed then impatient. There was no hostility, only exhaustion. Maurice placed the evidence in a folder. Over the following 2 weeks, 7 more individuals came forward. One had a cell phone picture of a citation. Another brought their son who had been ticketed while walking home from school for obstructing foot traffic on a neighborhood sidewalk. Noticeably, the charge had quietly disappeared. The record remained consistent. Each story followed a familiar pattern of vague accusations and heavy-handed authority. There was no video evidence from the police, and nearly all reports came from Black community members. Even the courthouse clerk noticed this. One morning she pulled Maurice aside in the hallway and whispered, "I am not supposed to say this, but I have seen cases like these come through for years. No one has ever challenged them the way you have." Maurice kept his eyes down and continued his work. Meanwhile, Kent tried to pretend nothing had changed. He still appeared in uniform and continued patrolling. But everything felt different. People were watching him closely now, and store owners no longer greeted him as they once did. A teenager pulled out his phone and began recording. As Kent entered the gas station, he snapped, "Are you filming me for no reason?" The kid replied, "You give people reasons." The news spread quickly, and soon a local pastor, Reverend Jerome Baines, invited Maurice to say a few words after Sunday service. Maurice hesitated. He was not a preacher. But the Reverend assured him, "You do not have to preach, just show people they are not wrong for feeling the way they do." So Maurice stood in front of a packed church hall and spoke for 5 minutes. He did not call out Kent directly or raise his voice. He simply said, "It is difficult to explain to those who have never faced it what it feels like when the system smiles at the people hurting you and tells you to move on. But you do not have to move on. You can stand firm with your words. With your evidence and your rights, that is exactly what I did." The room remained silent for several seconds, longer than anyone had anticipated. Then came the applause, not overwhelming or boisterous, but steady, profound, and genuine. At that moment, the barrier finally gave way. 2 former officers came forward, both retired and long gone from the police force. One confirmed that internal complaints regarding Kent were routinely passed to a supervisor who consistently suppressed them. The other admitted he had witnessed Kent manipulate facts and reports on more than one occasion. The Ledger published another article, this time including names and direct quotes. It still refrained from labeling Kent a racist, but presented the statistics, the recurring pattern, and the silence. People were beginning to connect the dots by themselves. Even the city council began to pay attention. A proposal to create a civilian oversight board, which had been shelved 2 years earlier, suddenly re-emerged. Citizens started attending meetings again, asking about data, demanding responsibility. Amid all this, Maurice Brand kept working quietly. He did not deliver speeches or appear on camera. Instead, he spent his days consulting clients, answering calls, assisting other drivers who wondered whether their tickets were worth challenging as well. One man told him, "You've got that badge to make them blink." Maurice did not smile. He simply nodded once and handed over the paperwork, because it was never about making anyone lose their nerve. It was about proving the system was not irreparably biased. Now, it was not only Maurice against Kent, the entire town was watching. The courtroom was more crowded than it had ever been, not because of some popular video or political move, but because news spread that Officer Bradley Kent was being called back to answer questions. This time it was not journalists or officials summoning him, but the very man he had attempted to silence. With a false accusation, Maurice sat at the same table as before. Yet now he was not the one facing judgment. This session was part of an internal inquiry mandated by Judge Tilson, relying on evidence and a formal request Maurice had submitted weeks earlier. It was not a criminal hearing, at least not yet, but it was held publicly. For the first time, Kent found himself accountable without the protection of his badge. He stood to testify, dressed in a dark navy suit rather than his uniform, without a firearm or shield. Simply a man taking an oath. Maurice arranged his papers and fixed his gaze on him. The quiet before Maurice spoke made the tension pulse like a heartbeat. "Officer Kent," he began, "do you recall how many traffic stops you conducted in the 12 months before I received my citation?" Kent narrowed his eyes as if irritated already. "Not exactly," he replied. Maurice raised a printed sheet. "Department records show you made 348 stops. Does that seem accurate?" Kent said, "It could be." "Out of those," Maurice continued, 211 involved black drivers, which is about 60%. Would you agree that matches the local population?" Kent shifted uncomfortably. "I stop vehicles based on violations, not race," he said. Maurice remained unfazed and asked, "So it is just a coincidence that the majority of your tickets go to black drivers?" Maurice Brand went to speak with the black residents of Winslow, and now sat quietly at the back as a calm observer. He winced at the question, but the trio of administrators in charge of the review did not object, and a keen-eyed black woman called Marianne Duggar jotted down notes. Maurice spoke again. "Let's return to the moment I was stopped. You said I was verbally defiant. Can you explain what you meant by that?" "I was given an order and did not follow it immediately, so, asking if I was being detained, that counts as resistance." which is simply refusal to comply. Did I make any threats? Number, did I raise my voice? Number, were you ever in danger during that encounter? Kent leaned back, saying, "You never know with some people. I don't wait to find out." The atmosphere grew tense. Maurice paused and then calmly stated, "So, your justification for filing an obstruction charge was based not on what I did, but on your assumptions." Kent did not respond. Maurice stepped closer. "Officer Kent, are you aware that 14 of your previous obstruction charges were dismissed because there was insufficient evidence? That is not my call. The courts dismissed them, isn't that right? But you were the one who documented those charges, who triggered the accusations, and who turned minor incidents into criminal records." Kent's mouth opened as if to answer, but no words came out. Maurice placed a file on the table. "Here is the testimony of Dion Patrick, who was ticketed and arrested at the age of 19 for suspicious behavior while riding his bicycle home, losing his job as a result. That charge was eventually dropped. This report was filed by you. He presented another ticket issued to Yolanda Drew's husband for an aggressive attitude. During a standard license check, your name appeared on this one as well." He pointed to a third ticket and then to another. "This last case involved a 14-year-old who was stopped while walking home from school, cited for blocking the sidewalk. That particular case never went to court because a judge dismissed it. Guess who initiated the charge?" Maurice paused and said, "You generated documents that painted these individuals as threats on record even when no incident occurred. You distributed accusations as if they were mere warnings, but I wonder, Officer Kent, how many people simply paid the fine or remained silent, thinking no one would believe them over you." For a moment, Kent's expression changed, not with guilt, but with fear. One of the administrators leaned toward the microphone and asked, "Officer Kent, do you deny that your application of obstruction citations has been inconsistent with the department's policies?" Kent faltered, I act according to my training." Maurice interrupted softly, "Or is it what you knew you could get away with?" That statement lingered as the head administrator called for a short recess. When they came back, Kent appeared smaller, somehow less certain and less shielded. Maurice showed no triumph and did not smile. He just took a seat, folded his papers, and waited. Outside the courthouse, a group of high schoolers gathered holding small posters that read, "Know Your Rights." Someone had printed copies of Maurice's original video transcript. Maurice Brand distributed the materials without anticipating such a gesture, yet he valued it deeply because his mission was never about a single moment. However, Maurice was not driven by vengeance. He sought something greater. Maurice Brand was not the type to raise his tone. Residents of Valdosta had seen him attend town meetings, charity events, and veterans gatherings. He arrived early and stayed late, always maintaining that calm and steady demeanor. He rarely spoke about his own life, but if you inquired, you would discover he had served 15 years in the military, completing 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He earned a Bronze Star and an honorable discharge, and rather than fading into retirement, he pursued law studies at the University of Florida on a full scholarship. Maurice could have left Valdosta behind, moved to Atlanta or Washington, D.C., or accepted a corporate job, but he chose otherwise. He returned home, leasing a modest office just 2 blocks from the courthouse, offering legal assistance to veterans and families with limited income. His fees were almost non-existent when he could manage it. Some clients tried to compensate him with fresh vegetables from their gardens or plates of ribs from weekend barbecues, both of which he accepted warmly. His routine was straightforward. Consultations during the morning, afternoons dedicated to more work, followed by a quiet dinner, often alone, but without bitterness. Maurice did not seek fame. He simply despised seeing others mistreated, especially by men like Bradley Kent. After the traffic stop that evening, Maurice did not contact anyone or share anything online. Instead, he sat quietly in his apartment above his office, watching the footage twice. He carefully recorded every detail he could recall about the moment the words were exchanged, and the exact instant Kent's voice changed. Then he opened his filing cabinet and retrieved a folder named Misconduct VPD. Inside, there were notes and statements from previous clients, individuals who claimed they had been harassed, searched without cause, or ticketed for incidents that never occurred. Maurice Brand had listened to their stories and documented their accounts, but until now there was never enough proof to take action. Kent's name appeared in 5 distinct reports. Maurice studied those pages for a long while before adding his own experience as the 6th. The following morning, he made 3 copies of the video file. One went onto a flash drive, Another was prepared for uploading to a secure cloud storage later, and the third was burned onto a disk which was then labeled and locked away safely. Quietly, with no media attention or fanfare, he submitted a formal complaint to the police department, sticking solely to the facts. Afterward, he returned to his work as though nothing unusual had happened, drafting a will for a retired sergeant, assisting a single mother with finalizing a custody case, and replying to 2 letters from imprisoned veterans seeking help with appeals. Throughout it all, Maurice was quietly assembling a case. He understood better than most not to depend blindly on justice. His experience in combat and courtrooms had taught him to always come prepared and never to expect the system to correct itself. Maurice began studying body camera request procedures and memorizing Georgia's municipal laws concerning traffic stops and obstruction charges, preparing himself thoroughly for what might come next. Maurice Brand quietly contacted a former military comrade, who was now working as an investigator in nearby Decatur. He sent the footage and requested an analysis focusing on voice patterns and aggression during law enforcement encounters. "Are you going to file this?" his friend inquired. "Already done," Maurice responded. "But I am taking it a step further." "Are you hiring a lawyer?" "No. I am representing myself," Maurice said firmly. His friend did not laugh. Instead, he softly whistled, warning, "Do not underestimate how much they will try to bury this." Maurice replied, "I am counting on it." By Friday, Maurice had uncovered 6 prior complaints against Kent. 3 formal, internal reports and 3 informal ones. None resulted in any disciplinary action. They had all vanished into bureaucratic voids. However, Maurice had something different. Solid proof and a voice unshaken by authority figures or impassive judges. He accepted the citation, filed an official court challenge, and requested permission to serve as his own attorney. At the courthouse, a clerk gave him a surprised look. "Wait, you are the defendant?" she asked. He smiled, saying, "In this case, yes." She shook her head slightly and handed him the stamped documents. "Well, good luck," she said. Maurice did not need luck but sharp attention to detail. This was not a personal grudge for him. He had been stopped before and insulted worse. But this incident felt different. It felt like the right time to expose the truth and make it public. He was determined not to let it go unnoticed. The review board took 3 days to make their decision. In a small town like Valdosta, that was quite a long time. People were drawn to this situation, not because it involved a body or a scandal, but because they were curious. They did not wait in anticipation of Maurice Brand facing jail time, as this was not that type of event. What made it unique was that for the first time in many years, the idea of holding someone responsible seemed within reach. Maurice did not come to the hearing for attention. He attended because the matter was significant. Wearing the same gray suit and maintaining his usual composed look, he sat alone close to the front with only a single notepad resting on his lap. At exactly 9 o'clock and 7 minutes in the morning, 3 board members entered the courtroom with neutral expressions, bringing no dramatic flair. Chairwoman Duggar, who had remained mostly quiet during earlier sessions, took charge of the discussion. She announced, "We have completed an internal review of Officer Bradley Kent's record, behavior, and the pattern of citations outlined in Mr. Maurice Brand's submission." After pausing to adjust her glasses and look directly at Kent, she continued, "The board recommends that Officer Kent be suspended without pay while a thorough departmental investigation into his conduct is carried out. Additionally, we urge the department to reopen and reassess 17 of his previous obstruction cases and forward any conclusions to the district attorney's office for possible legal proceedings." No cheers or gasps followed her words, only a profound silence as if a burden was being lifted. Kent remained silent and motionless while his lawyer quietly conveyed something to him, which clearly failed to register. His fingers clenched the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned pale while Maurice Brand remained motionless. He cast his eyes downward at his notepad, closing it deliberately before rising. He no longer needed to listen. As he approached the door, Chairwoman Duggar spoke. "Finally, the board wishes to recognize Mr. Brand for his diligent, respectful, and lawful quest for justice, which has prompted a vital moment of introspection for both this department and this town." Maurice nodded courteously and then quietly left the room. Outside, the familiar local journalist from the Ledger awaited him. "Maurice, just one question. What inspired you to pursue this matter so thoroughly?" she asked. He glanced her way and responded evenly. Because individuals like Officer Kent depend on no one being too busy to stand up. Without another word, he continued walking toward his office. The phone rang incessantly. Veterans, students, teachers, church officials, and even a judge from a neighboring county had left messages. You've made a real difference. Let's discuss increasing legal support in schools. Yet Maurice did not take time to revel in the success. He resumed his work, spending the afternoon assisting a woman with custody paperwork for her grandson. Later that night, he met a young barber who had just received his first traffic citation and was unsure how to contest it. Sitting across from him, Maurice carefully reviewed the ticket and remarked, "This case is weak. We can have it dismissed." The young man grinned and asked, "Have you ever considered entering politics?" Maurice laughed. "Not in this lifetime." "Why not?" "You're already accomplishing more than most elected officials." Maurice Brand preferred to create something enduring, rather than push for a fleeting cause, a thought he reflected on later that evening. Sitting alone with a single piece of paper before him, Maurice faced a fresh matter unrelated to Kent or traffic stops. This was a straightforward rental dispute involving an elderly woman whose landlord was trying to evict her after nearly 2 decades. He grabbed his pen and noted, "Begin with the lease, then request the payment history." Justice, he believed, was not about sensational headlines, but the small details, the neglected issues, the ones people had abandoned hope for. Because no one had ever encouraged them to believe in victory, Kent would probably never don that badge again. Yet Maurice had not acted to remove one man. His purpose was to remind an entire community. Silence was not safety. Tranquility did not equal defeat. Standing up did not demand shouting. It meant showing up with your truth, your evidence, and your courage intact. What followed left a profound impact. Weeks went by. The summer heat gradually softened into something almost bearable. Valdosta kept its pace. Trucks continued rumbling down Patterson Avenue. Children still played under sprinklers in front yards. But beneath the surface, a change had taken root. Quiet, steady, and lasting. It started modestly with a young woman named Kaylin Hoskins, who had been ticketed 2 years earlier for failing to yield by Officer Kent. She appeared at the courthouse with her documents and requested to have her case reopened, explaining, "I paid it because I thought I had no option. Now I understand I was not alone." A group of college students from Valdosta State began organizing weekend workshops called Know Your Rights sessions, open to the public at no charge. Maurice Brand assisted them in drafting their materials. Though he declined to be the public face, his influence was evident in every guideline and piece of counsel they provided. The city council held a public meeting to discuss creating a civilian board to oversee police complaints. This time it was more than just talk. There were sign-up sheets, volunteers, and minutes that were recorded and shared publicly. People were paying attention. Meanwhile, at Stokes Community Center, a retired educator named Evelyn Greer initiated a local coalition to support court participants by sitting with defendants during hearings, observing the process, taking notes, and simply being present. This was not meant to intimidate or confront, just to watch. Maurice followed his usual pattern. He did not give speeches or agree to interviews beyond those for the Ledger newspaper. Yet when people came to his office, he made time for them. He offered help with leases, traffic disputes, and restraining orders. No matter how minor the case or overlooked the person, he treated every matter seriously. One afternoon, a teenage boy named Jalen arrived with his uncle. Not because he was in trouble, but because he wanted to learn. "I heard you used to be a soldier," Jalen asked quietly. Maurice nodded. "I was. And now you are a lawyer?" Jalen hesitated but continued, "Which one is tougher?" Maurice reflected briefly and replied, "Neither. They are just different kinds of battles." Jalen nodded thoughtfully. "I want to do what you do. Help people." Morris smiled, "Then start by listening more than you talk. Pay attention, keep your paperwork straight, and never show up empty-handed." That same day, Morris received an envelope from the district attorney's office. Inside was a letter confirming that 5 of Kent's previous obstruction cases had been formally dismissed. 2 of the individuals had already been notified. The letter ended with "Thank you for bringing these matters to light." Morris folded it carefully and tucked it into a drawer. No frame, no announcement. That night he walked to the corner store. The clerk, a young man he didn't know by name, paused while ringing up his bottle of water. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks. My cousin got pulled over by that same officer. Said he never felt safe saying anything. You made him feel like he wasn't crazy. Maurice nodded, once, tell him he wasn't, and walked out. The street was quiet. But not the kind of quiet that felt forgotten. It was alert, aware, watchful. Back at his apartment, he stood at the window sipping the water. Slowly, a car rolled by, windows down. Music drifting low, a couple walked their dog on the far sidewalk. No blue lights, no confrontation, just people moving forward. Change doesn't come in waves, it comes in inches, and sometimes it takes one man with a phone and the will to fight for the inches. Maurice never thought he'd be anyone's example. He wasn't after a spotlight, he just wanted the truth to matter, and in Valdosta finally, he did exactly that. Switched off the lamp, settled back at his desk, and accessed the following document. A new client, a fresh situation, a small step ahead. If this narrative touched you or shifted your perspective about bravery and fairness, please take a moment to subscribe. We share meaningful stories, revealing one truth after another.